You're not cheating on your wife if you eat my lemon square.
Your lemon squares taste like ass.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. So we are delighted to be joined by Addison Heimann. He is the writer-director of Hypochondriac, which is a new queer horror film that's about to come out. So thank you so much for joining us and having a conversation with us. We wanted to open by acknowledging that it's very evident in all the press materials and a lot of the Q&As that you've been doing, and even the opening of the film, that this is based on your real life mental health struggles. So we wanted to try to ask you some different types of questions. So we're going to begin by asking if you can tell us about some of the smaller details, breadcrumbs, if you will, of living with mental illness that you ended up incorporating into the film. And maybe if there was anything that you felt like hadn't been done before, or if it was like a new opportunity to explore it.
Yeah, totally. You know, what's funny is like, I'm like, I love horror stories about mental illness. I was just about to say that, but I mean, I do. But like, you know, like I think for me, like, there's been so many stories where it's like mental health is the horror and the horror is demons. Like, you know, it's like, we don't believe you, we don't believe you, we don't believe you, we don't believe you. And I wanted to try to explore from a different perspective of like, what if we always know what's in his mind? Because to me, when I was going through it, it didn't matter, you know, if it was real or not, because all I felt the physical pain, you know, I felt the panic attacks. Like, I could feel all of this, and, you know, I couldn't breathe at certain times. So like, you know, for me, it's just like, you know, that it didn't matter if it was real. So like my goal with this movie was to tell kind of an emotional retelling of my mental breakdown through like every kind of tonal is like more what I'm going for, because like honestly, like mental breakdowns, you know, barring like a lot of time, right, are really funny in certain aspects, you know.
Hindsight.
In hindsight, right? I mean, like there's this. I mean, this didn't end up making the movie, and ended up making a movie. But so basically, like the long and short of it is like I lost working function in my arms for 6 months, and so I couldn't, this is queer horrors, masturbate. And I had to, you know, and so
get creative.
I had to get creative. So I ordered a flashlight and I ordered a shower mount, and I put that on the shower. And I'm also on antidepressants at this time. So, and I I just remember sitting in my shower, like pants down to my ankles, because I'm wearing pants in the shower, because I don't know. And I'm fucking this thing for an hour, and I can't I just can't come. And so and it's just go to the point where I'm just like, well, I got to use my hand. So I use my hand, and then of course I use my hand, and I'm like, oh, my hand, you know. So it's like, you know, when I told my producer this, he was like, hey, I was like, what if we use this scene in the movie? He was like, what if you fucked a flashlight? He's like, why don't let's give it 24 hours.
I will say though, that's awesome. I mean, sorry, not the fact that you like couldn't masturbate and had to use a no, but I mean, I'm on Adderall right now, and like that actually for me personally affects stimulation sometimes. And so like it is interesting how like with anything with mental illness, it's like, oh, of course, sex related things are the first things to go.
You know, and that's the thing, right? So it's like, I text my producer the next day. He's like, well, what do you think? He's like, I'm sorry, I just don't think you should fuck a flashlight. And I was like, what? And then I went back in the text messages, and it autocorrected from flashlight to flashlight. And I was like, I'm not Lars von Triering this. I'm not trying to cut out clitoris and coming blood. Like maybe the next one.
And then you send him a link to all the flashlight materials.
Yeah. But like, ultimately, I think, you know, in terms of just like for me, like a couple things, like, you know, the doctors, like going to all these doctors and like seeing these people and like telling me these things, telling me you'd be shocked how the mind can affect the body, just like these are, which are real. And like my mom calling me, those are transcriptions. from like her actual voicemails, so it's like I tried to use as much as was interesting about the mental breakdown in the movie, because that was like my first couple drafts. They're like, that's not interesting, and I'm like, but it happened. And they're like, just because it happened doesn't mean it's interesting. And I was like, right.
I will say though, narratively speaking, one of the things I do really appreciate about the film is that I know we still call him an unreliable narrator, but yes, the losing the is he crazy or isn't he? Is he really seeing demons? That was the most refreshing aspect of the narrative that you chose for me. I think that was great.
Thanks. Yeah, because anybody who's gone through mental illness, like anybody who's gone through chronic pain, anybody who's existed as a queer person, like can understand this idea of not being taken seriously, even though what's happening feels real and seems real. So that was my ultimate like goal as we were going through, and to also like make sure we like, like we can call the like, the big giant bunny in the room, like, we can call him out. Like Donnie Darko obviously is like a huge, inspiration for me, because I think because that movie deals with mental illness, but like it's kind of more of a sci-fi. I think something so, which is what I was trying to tell my cast and my crew, my producers. It's like in Donnie Darko, you have Patrick Swayze and the teacher being like the most hammy things in the world, and then you have like a scene in which Donnie's like sitting on his bed crying and talking to his mom, being like, how does it feel to have a wacko for a son? And she says it feels fantastic. And that's in the same movie, and to me it's like that's a mental breakdown. Like I have I'm in so much pain, and my boss is being like, you have to work or we're gonna fire you. And I'm just like, okay, you know what I mean? Like that, but that's that's in the same, the same world. So yeah.
I think too, as like if you think about how horror tends to depict these, like we often see it depicted in like films dealing with women protagonists, like it's become very popular recently. But as Trace mentioned, it's usually like, oh, do we actually trust them? And as a viewer, it's not interesting for me. I'll speak for myself because I don't speak for everybody else, but I'm just like, no, I always trust her. Like, and so it's
like,
nice
that's
that
the invisible. It's the invisible man, right? It's like one thing I really like about that movie is the amount of time that they spent not believing her is like so small, and then they just like leave her in the house for like 30 minutes, and I'm like, that's why this movie's good, because I'm so done with people being like, well, I don't believe you, and you're like, but it's like in zombie movies where they don't say the word zombie. It's you're like, it's been in our zeitgeist, guys. Like we can call it out because it's been there. So yeah.
Well, so okay, so Luke, I mean, let's just go into these queer aspects too, because I mean, representation is obviously a big topic in media today, and especially in film and television. With Hypochondriac, you have a lead who is queer and also Latinx, and so were there any? I mean, let's go back to these breadcrumbs too, because is there anything in the film that you were like, oh, I'm putting this in here because people who are queer, people who are Latinx, are going to pick up on these things that quote unquote normal viewers might not get?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, well, one with like the sex scene. I mean, like that was like the most important thing, because like, I listen, like no shade to Rocket Man, but like, and we love seeing Taron Egerton and Richard Madden fuck, but it's like they're like boom boom enter. It's like it's the same thing with like Brokeback Mountain. Is you're just like no one
fucks that way.
Yeah, and so like specifically with that scene, I was like, we need to take our time. Like, we need to show an ass eating scene, especially because, and it was like talking with our actors, like why that was important, why it was important to do full frontal and all this kind of stuff. It's like, that's Will at his rock bottom. It is literally him at his rock bottom. And I would argue like getting your butt eaten is like one of the most intimate things you could do in the world. And that's what's, it's interesting because I'm Puerto Rican, very white passing, but my mom isn't. And that was like an interesting thing. I didn't realize it till like much later when I was an adult, because we grew up in like a primarily like white suburb, and like a lot of that kind of Mean Girls, basically, like you get it. And so when I was a kid, I was always doing is trying to hide the fact that she was bipolar from everybody, but I didn't notice that like extra layer of like racism that like exists within that world. And I think to an extent, I mean, not me specifically, but I mean, in a way, that's the medical system as well. I mean, there's this idea that you're just like, oh, I mean, like you look at there's so many like facts and figures about how like people of color are treated much less seriously in the doctor's room than white people, and all that kind of stuff. So like that,
Well,
And
it's like the question on the forums where it's like, are you Latin or of Hispanic descent? But there's no question like that for any other ethnicity.
no, yeah, and it's so because like I mean it's true, like South America. I mean, look at Roma. I mean, Mexico. Like that movie is about like a white family like with an indigenous maid. Like that
Right.
that actually colorism is a huge thing in South America, but we kind of forget that in North America because like especially in LA where I live, because everybody's like, oh, they think Hispanic means Mexican, but there are Puerto Ricans, Cubans,
Yes.
you know, Colombians, etc. And that is the entirety of South America. And so, you know, I think overall, like I was like, when I'm writing this, I was like, you know what? I don't like, and especially when I talk about my Latinx heritage, like I can just speak very specifically to my story.
Right.
And so when
yeah.
when I talk things about my family, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about because I can speak to this. Because my taco nights weren't hard shell tacos and milk; they were like, you know, real tacos. You know, just saying. Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, then, did you ever question whether or not you wanted to go with a more light-skinned actor, or was it like this was the right person for the role?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it was ultimately just up to who auditioned the best. I
Okay.
saw both, and it was really just like who was the best for the part. And that's ultimately what I went with because you know Zach just gave the best audition and he killed it. So you know,
So going back to the ass eating. So,
of course, let's do it.
Sorry, we couldn't let you go without.
I mean, so when writing or planning out this sex scene, was it the
Yeah.
rim job where you were like, this? I need this particular act in this scene?
Yes. In fact, it's funny because my casting director made, I mean, like with love, she was like, let's tone it down. And then like when we get to the actual conversations with the actors, like not just in the script, not because I was like, well,
right.
I'm not toning this down. But yeah, that specifically was like the most important, like specifically the rim job. Because I don't know, like every gay boy or queer boy knows what it's like.
No,
You know,
I mean, like I remember when I was a kid, like I was watching an episode of ER and like learned about like they mentioned something about gay sex. And I remember asking my parents like, oh, how do gay men have sex? And
Yeah.
my mom, who's much better now, but she was just like, it's really gross. You don't want to hear about it. And I was like, oh. And of course now I'm like, oh. But I feel like no, it's like destigmatizing what the idea that people have about rim jobs is like some nasty thing, and it doesn't have to be.
No, it can be, you know, and that's the thing too, is when we planned out, you know, this is we worked with an intimacy coordinator and we worked, because that, you know, that scene has like stunts and it has violence and it has blood and it has sexual encounter. So we had like all hands on deck.
Yeah.
Everything.
So, yeah, basically. And that was like everybody's like, what's your hardest day on set? I'm like, that one. And we were also like below the 101, like in one of the worst parking lots, like inhaling dust. It was the worst. But you know, that was, and I'll always, I mean, obviously I'm glad that the you know, the industry is changing in this way, but like it just so happens that my friend from high school happens to do intimacy work, and she, you know, and so getting to talk, it's like very like by the time we got to set, like I had told Carly what I wanted, and then Carly told the actors what I wanted, and they told Carly what they were comfortable with, and then Carly put that in a document for all three of us. And so by the time we got onto set, it was like everybody knows what they're doing. And in fact, I'll tell this story that I don't really tell very often. Is there's two, we shot two different versions of the ass eating. I mean, in terms of from a different angle, because like there's one where he goes in and then he flips him over and then we see him over the back, but there's a scene from the side, and I was looking at the camera and we were doing it and I was like, it just doesn't look real, and then Devin was like, well, now I'm just right in his butthole. And I'm like, right, there's a difference between like porn and like storytelling. So that was like, but it's because we had that trust, we had all these people here, we all understood what we were doing, we could be like, okay, that probably isn't necessary, so we just cut it and then move on, because it's like, you know, that's not what we're trying to do, you know.
Right. Joe, this is not on our question list, but I'm just curious.
No,
so when you're dealing with full frontal, I mean, you have two actors who are completely naked, who are both how if like, does someone get an erection, or how, like, is it just like, oh, there's cameras around me, it's impossible for me to get like actually stimulated right now? But I don't know, like, how do you handle that?
Well, we didn't encounter that. It was very respectful, and you know, I didn't, you know, my job as a director is to like, you know, like I realized that too, was like, I'm the one who actually has to watch the scene, because part of me is like, no, I'll just like kind of watch it to give them privacy. It's like literally that's my job. But you know, we never encountered that. There was never an awkward thing. It was like all of us were like, this is the scene we're doing. We're going to focus on doing this scene, and we're going to move forward. And if something weird happens, we'll talk about it. We'll powwow, and then we'll move on.
Right. I will say, as an audience member, like as a queer audience member, I was like, oh, I'm really like excited by this scene because it feels like we never get to see it. And then for you to transition from that into like, oh no, this is a horrifying incident. We're going into horror again. Maybe none of this actually happened. I was just like, fuck you, man. Fuck you.
Well,
Like,
and it's not something you're ever
angry.
going to see in like a mainstream studio release, right?
Well, right. I like, if I ever get the chance to make another movie, I'm like, I get this one. Like, this is the one that I get to do as queer, as fucking psychopath as possible. And then later they're gonna be like, could you like not do the ass scene? I'm like, what if we do it in like shadow? And they'll be like,
It's
no.
artsy.
Yeah, I was just like artsy it up, or A24 it up, you know.
We're just going to do the Candyman marionette kind of shadow puppetry
exactly.
thing. It'll be really
my
tasteful.
God. I mean, I'm actually going to steal that now. I'm just going to put like a marionette sex scene for the next movie. Yeah.
Oh God. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the horror, because it's been interesting watching the reviews come in. Obviously, we're recording this before the film is widely available on VOD, but it seems like some people really prefer the relationship drama parts, and then other people really like the more hallucinatory kind of, ooh, we're going into questionable narrator horror territory.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, how did you decide on a visual style to capture those hallucinations? And like, there's very specific editing choices where it's like we frequently just kind of smash cut to black, and it's like, oh, suddenly Will's in a completely different place now.
Right. And that, I mean, like, to me, that was like, and my actors had questions of that too, especially with like the scene after Zach or Will first injures himself, and we cut to, he's like, why am I not more in pain? It's just like, well, one, you're trying to hide it, and two, like, we don't know how. Did you really fall that hard? Did you not really fall that hard? Like, we're starting. That's like the first moment of like unreliable like narrator, like go. And I think, you know, I think for me, like we did it both post and in actual principal photography. Like, you know, Dustin, my DP, you know, we dealt with a like bunch of different camera techniques. We had a lot of zooms. Like, we put like Vaseline on the edges of the frame to look a little blurry. We used something called a lens baby, which like completely like kind of warps our entity. And I think for me, you'll see like the cross dissolves, and that to me came from I always use this like description of like how I describe bipolar. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. And, you know, when Jekyll's Jekyll, he's great, he's lovely, he's a nice person. But when he's Hyde, he's a monster. But when he goes back to Jekyll, he never remembers what happens when he's Hyde. So it's like every time he kind of like fractures in those moments when he injures himself, or he's like in the process of all these like hallucinogenics, like splitting apart at the seams, right? There's Jekyll over here, and there's Hyde. And like having them, you know, both coming in and out and coming in and out is like representative of like what happens when you are, you know, mentally ill. You're literally fracturing yourself, the one side of your logical self, which is like really, you know, they're being like, no. And this is the thing, I suffer from catastrophic thoughts and OCD, something I had no idea of at the time. So when I like basically what happened, like I was like, you know, I lost functioning of my arms for 6 months because I thought that was like dying of ALS, and I injured myself at work. And then that was just like a climb out of that hole. You know, but like, but with like, ooh, I lost myself.
You're good.
Fractures,
visuals, feelings.
Oh yeah, and that was the thing too, right? It's like it's called Hypochondriac. Like there are listen, like people will either love this movie, people might not like this movie. Like ultimately, I made this. I think there's something for everybody, right? If you're a person who suffers from chronic pain, you'll understand what that's like. You know, I didn't feel like showing the chronic pain, because that's the thing. And this is my aunt Vicky, like, put it in the best way. She's like, I'm in 3 different kinds of pain right now. And when somebody asks if I'm in pain, and I say no, I'm in pain. Right. And then when somebody asks if I'm in pain, and I say yes, I'm in so much pain I'm ready to keel over. But you'd never know, because like that's the thing. Like you just don't know with that kind of stuff. And when you're trying not to be a burden on someone, you're being this kind of like song, for me at least, like you're being the song and dance man to the point where like it wasn't like it took me a really long time to ask for help because I just didn't want to be a burden on like on someone. And ultimately, like, you know, like when he's like literally in his home, like with Luke and he's cutting his food, just says, I'm such a fucking idiot. I'm such a fucking idiot. And there's no one there for him to tell him otherwise, you know? Oh, I remember what I was saying. So the catastrophic thoughts. There are two forms of two voices that I've learned. I read a book, but it was really helpful, so I trust it. It's helpful. There's your worried voice and your false comfort voice that kind of spiral into you know, distraction. Your worried voice comes like when you get that pang of anxiety. You're just like, oh, I'm gonna like I think I'm dying right now, and then your false comfort voice goes, you're not dying right now, you're fine. See, you're like, you just went to the doctor like two weeks ago, like let's not worry about it. And then the thing that I didn't realize is that false comfort voice isn't helpful. All it does is provide ammunition to get that thought stuck in your brain. And so, you know, like that to me was honestly the worst part of it, because I didn't realize that like I had to go through a whole different section of like, oh, like I can't give these thoughts power. I have to not ignore them, like go away, but acknowledge the thought and breathe through it. Because that's the weird thing about anxiety, is that anxiety is as if the thought that you just had is happening in real life. You know, like, I think I'm dying. You feel like you're dying, you know? And that to me was like such a wild thing to realize, because like we don't, you know, it's like when I started telling my story, you know, it's like, hey, this happened to me. And they're like, this happened to me. And I'm like, wow, we don't talk about this, and isn't that wild? And they're like, don't you feel less alone? And I'm like, no, because you had to go through this and I had to go through this. It all
yeah, we all got to go through like shit and no one talked about it. Yay.
Yeah.
But even going back into like not wanting to be a burden for people, I mean, again, the relationship between Will and Luke in this movie is one of my favorite things as well, because it's showing, again, like obviously Will is the protagonist here, but showing how it affects loved ones, and specifically a partner. And you don't have to answer this question, but like, were you partnered when you were going through your breakdown as well?
So I wasn't partnered going through my breakdown, but the weird thing is I've been both the caretaker and the person who takes care of with my mother. So it's like, you know, I had to take care of my mother when I was a kid, right, because my dad, you know, would like go on business trips and like leave me alone with him. And my sisters were like 4 and I'm like 12 to 18, like having to be the caretaker, being like, no, mom, your mom is your mother. No, there's not. The Secret Service is not out to get you. No, there's not a bomb in the pool heater. Like, you know, don't like, oh, no, you're not. There's CIA is not going to kill you. Like all this kind of stuff. So Luke's character was like an amalgamation of like all my friends that I combined into one. But I will say, funnily enough, when I started shooting, I have a partner now. I've been dating for a year and a half, and we had been dating for 8 months when I started shooting the movie. So I was able to pepper some of that, because I had to do some rewrites because there were some songs we couldn't get the rights to, which is a whole thing.
Never Domino though.
Oh, we did get. Oh yeah, and Jessie J, we had to find. Like it was like we got her. I mean, she was the one who approved it. So that's
awesome.
I mean, I don't personally know Jessie J, but like we were able to like person through person, and she pushed it through. She's like, I'll say it's my friend's movie. I'm pretty sure.
By that friend?
Yeah. I'm friends with Jessie. Yeah, Jesse invited me to your concert. You let me use your song, and it just elevates the movie in general, because now it's like, ooh, song from 2011 when I was in college.
I mean, it was again watching it, I was like, oh, like this is immediately like putting me in such a calm mood after an opening scene that is obviously very, very disturbing.
Right.
Yeah. But it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like we're good for a little bit.
Yeah, and it's funny. That was a song I had playing in my head from the moment I started writing it. And so when we were shooting all those like inserts of Zach just like dancing, he's like, "What am I listening to?" And I was like, "Domino by Jessie J." So it cut together perfectly because he was literally listening to Domino by Jessie J.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's see.
I didn't even want to ask you about Jeff Drives You at all.
Okay. Yes.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. So yes, we're obviously talking about Hypochondriac, and it's a great film, interesting film. Can't wait to see all the discussions that are going to come around as a result of it. I heard about you because I caught Jeff Drives You, your short from a couple of years ago, at a bunch of different film festivals. And I really fucking loved it. It was like one of my favorite shorts of the year.
Oh my God, thank you. What?
But it means wild. Now I have a question for you about it. So
yeah.
This is It's a fantastic short, people. If you have not seen it, definitely seek it out. It's about
and
a
then
man
go listen
who,
to us talk about it.
yes, we have an episode
oh my
on
god.
it.
Oh my god. Yeah, it's on Dust. I mean, go. Oh my god, that's so. I yes, ask the question. Yes.
Well,
Okay.
wait, I'm sorry, wait. Because no, whenever Hypochondriac was coming to South by, Joe was like, "Oh no, it's the guy that did Jeff Drives You." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that was the selling point for both of us.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
So Jeff Drives You, obviously
Yeah.
a very funny, amusing premise. It's about an intimate relationship between a man and his self-driving car. And then I have this weird, vivid memory of the first time I saw it, that the short ends with the car killing Jeff, or sorry, that the car kills him. And and we have this funny moment of like the techs, removing cum from the car, and there's like women being like, "Oh yeah, we've done this before and it hasn't gone badly." But I have this memory that there was a darker version of it. And I know that people know you for your comedy work before Hypochondriac, but I wonder, did you ever contemplate ending Jeff Drives You, or was there another draft of it that you ever contemplated having like a darker, more horrific ending?
You know what? Yes, that was in the original draft, but everybody was like it's Black Mirror, man. Like this, we're expecting him to die. So I was like, oh, interesting. So I changed it. And it's funny because when I first started the draft, and like that's actually like the monologue that he gives before he has sex with the car, that's my actual coming out story. Like I just put it in the movie, and that was, and so that wasn't in the original draft either. So like that, once it became, I guess, more personal, and then also like I think maybe I'll be able to maybe unravel that. I'm glad, like, we have stuff like Halloween Kills where like, you have Michael McDonald and like they both die. I mean, it's a slasher, so like, of course, and like obviously in Knife and Heart, like they die, like a Rift or like Raw. Like we have these queer characters dying, but because it's like so personal to me, and because like a lot of my stuff deals with mental health, like it's important to me just as a queer storyteller when I'm talking about that kind of stuff to make sure that there's some semblance of positivity in the end, which is like not necessarily what I need all the time, but like there's only so many times where we can start like Midsommar, where like an entire family just dies because someone's mentally ill and we just start the movie. Like no shade to Ari Aster, like I actually really love Midsommar, but like it's just like for me it was like, well, if we're going to tell a queer narrative that's so personal to me because I'm still here, I have to lead with that, at least for now. Like cue me like 3 movies later and I'm just like killing every queer person in like a Scream style, like this Heart ripoff. But like, which I would love as well. And like, I'm glad that stuff exists, but it's like, I think what's beautiful right now about queer horror that's starting to really like take an uptick is that there's every type of like, there's still like, I spent the entirety of my quarantine and pandemic looking for queer genre movies. And there's like the queer movie that's about being queer and like very much focuses on that. There's a queer movie that's independent of the queerness, and that's very much about that. There's horror movies that like deal with like mental illness and everybody dies, and then there's vice versa. So it's like there's all these like kind of cross sections in the Punnett Square. I had the weird metaphor, but like there's a bunch of different worlds now within the concept of queer genre. Before it was just like oh, you can't be gay, and that's just like the only thing we had. And then it was like, oh, let's tell a queer love story, and that was the only thing we had. And now we have queer characters across all versions of genre, all getting to exist both independently of the queerness and because of the queerness. And I think that's fantastic, and I just want to see more of that. And for me personally, like I will tell the stories of like positive queer stuff, but that doesn't mean I don't want the other stuff. I want the whole gamut, if that makes sense.
And that's a perfect like segue / transition to go back to Hypochondriac and kind of wrap us up here, though. But we're like, I mean, and spoilers if you haven't seen the film yet, but this has I don't want to say it's a happy ending, but it's an optimistic ending.
Yeah, it's not a happy ending, but it's I mean, that's the thing. So basically, and that's like, I'm writing another movie right now about, unfortunately, my sister's also bipolar. We have a lot of mental illness in my family, but like, so basically it's like, if this movie is a story about how I asked for help, the next one is a story of how I wrestled through the mental illness to come out the other side with empathy. And there's some quote that's on Instagram that I don't remember because I'm a terrible millennial, but it's basically along the lines of, if you can go through trauma and come out the other side with empathy, then that's a superpower. And so like that to me, like it's important, to the kind of story to tell. And I think basically, I won't completely ruin the ending, because like I think we're gonna even like it's gonna be okay, but I think the ending's still like but like the thing is, everybody has a wolf, right? there's no like, oh, it's not like you break your bone and then you heal your bone and then you're good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like obviously you could probably have to do some physical therapy, but it's always going to be there. There's never not a wolf, because that's not how mental illness works. Like I've regressed several times, but fortunately I have a doctor in the family and a good therapist and good antidepressants. So like, that's all, you know, like how I work through it. But, you know, ultimately it's just like, and it doesn't go away. It's still there, but there are ways to navigate that without going back to the place that you were when you were at your lowest.
Right. Yeah. And that seems like a lovely, hopeful message to take out of this for a film that is sometimes very difficult to endure. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Mental, like, unfortunately, because mental illness is also funny, it's also terrifying. It's like everything, right? There's everything in the ball of a mental breakdown, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you for having this discussion with us, Addison. It was nice to get to talk to you after seeing the film, which of course everyone, it's out April 8th, right? Is that the release?
No, I don't know where people got April 8th, but it will be it will be out sometime this summer. So we're not going to be waiting forever. It'll be out this summer. That's what I think. When I talking to James, my distributor, he's like, say late summer, and like that. Okay. So like you're not going to it'll be out within the next 6 months. Like that.
There we go.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
The near horizon, you will be able to watch this movie.
Yes, soon. We'll do a little theatrical window. We'll be in at least 10 screens, perhaps 20, and then obviously the PVOD and all that streaming stuff, etc.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks again for chatting with us, and congrats on the movie.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.